Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Workbench Wednesday. My name is Ryan. We're back here again. We've got a new setup tonight. So the first thing I'm hoping is that everyone can hear me just fine. I've got two different cameras set up here with me and two different microphones, and I don't hear feedback, so that either means it's working or no one can hear anything. So if you can't hear me, please, I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments right away. As I said, we've got a new platform here tonight. We're now streaming live on both Facebook as well as on YouTube. So this is might be the first time some of you have come across this program here on Lionel's channel. This is a program we do. We started this about 6 months or so ago now, it feels like. And it's been going really well. We do a different sort of take on this show. This is, as the name implies, it's Workbench Wednesday, and it's on Wednesday, and we're here at my workbench because that's how creative I am when it comes to coming up with names for programming. But the point of this program was to sort of talk about the modeling side of model railroading, and we've covered a number of topics over the last several months, from scenery making to some bench work basics. We've built some projects together, built some kits together, and lots of great topics that we've talked about over the time. And it's a nice chance to get away from talking about just new product and catalogs and so forth, and really focus on the hobby side of this. And it started out as we were all in the middle of this pandemic last year, and like many of you, I found myself spending a lot more time at my workbench, and it was a nice way to socialize and get to meet people and talk about like issues and so forth, and enjoy that. And from what we've seen over the last couple of months, we can tell that I'm certainly not unique in that. A lot of you have been at home working on your layouts, maybe just getting started in the hobby. Maybe you've already built your platform and you've been having fun playing with trains. And now things are starting to get back to normal again, which is great. But we still want to keep this going because it's just a lot of fun and a great chance to talk to everybody about actual modeling. So tonight's topic is going to be a little bit different than some of the past ones. We're actually going to talk about power and expansion of your layout, because this is one of the questions that we get so very often at shows and through our customer service and call center. Is, when do I need a bigger power supply? When do I need to add bus wires? How do I do that? What is a bus wire? What's the difference between a CW80 and a GW180? And why do I need one or the other? So we're going to talk about some of those things tonight to help get you started. If you've already started with a train set and you're starting to grow your layout, this is be a nice topic to get in there and explore. We're not going to get too in-depth tonight. We're not going to go into a lot of things on legacy or DCC or any of that. We're going to keep it relatively simple, relatively high level. If you have questions, please type them into your Facebook or into the YouTube comment scroll, and I'll be trying to keep up with some of those and answer them as we go along. I can even prompt some of you and put you up here on the screen if it's a really good one. So we've got a lot of fun things to do tonight. This is a new system, so hopefully all the bugs are worked out of it, and we can have some fun. Before I talk about power and control, I want to do a review for those of you who haven't seen the program before, or just were here the last couple of weeks. Take a minute here and show off the project we've been working on the last couple of weeks, which was this little mini diorama that's sitting here on the workbench. We pull up messy workbench cam here and switch that over to make it the primary view, so you can see that. Let me actually, now that I'm not as highlighted, I can get some more lighting here. So for the past couple of weeks, we've been talking about scenery, and when you guys saw this, if you tuned in last week's episode, you saw a big soupy mess of glue, and wanted everybody to have a chance to see what the final product looks like after everything's been finished. So these are, like I said, typical types of projects we've done here on Workbench Wednesday: is adding scenery, laying track, doing ballast, adding details, painting figures. We've done all sorts of these fun things. But tonight we're going to go underneath the platform and talk about power and control. So with that, let me take this guy out of the way. and start with power. So if you started off with a train set, you've probably got one of these two things on your layout. At least if you're a Lionel user. This is our CW80. This was our basic transformer, our last transformer really in our starter sets that we used in most of our starter sets up until about 2014, 2015. And since that point in time, we've gone to a much smaller and simpler plug-in version. So if you have one of our Lion Chief sets, then you probably have something very simple like this. It just plugs into the wall and plugs into your track, and you're all set to run. If you have one of our older transformer sets, you have something that looks like this, or maybe an older version of this type of a power supply. And these two are actually very different, not just in looks, but in terms of what they do and how they and the type of power they put out. So I'll talk about this one real quick because it's what we have now, and then we'll get back into this because this is where I think a lot of people are starting and where it may be hardest to see how you can expand. This is a typical DC wall pack. This one puts out 18 volts, and this is about I think this is our 54 watt power supply. This is the typical one that comes in most sets. We also sell a slightly more robust 72 watt power supply that gets you pretty close to the equivalent of the CW80 in terms of power output. Before I get too far ahead of myself, let's talk AC, DC, and watts and volts and amps. Okay, AC, DC, great band, new album rocks as always, but also in our world is alternating current, direct current. And that's a pretty big difference in the Lionel world of trains. For 100 years, we were alternating current. And then about 2015, we switched everything up and went to the world of a fixed DC direct current transformer. DC is also what you'll find if you're not modeling an O gauge 3-rail. If you're starting out in, say, HO, or even some of the large, or N, or even some of the G gauge trains use DC, you probably start off with a basic transformer that looks something like this, which is a variable speed DC transformer. The difference between that and this is this one is a fixed voltage output, whereas the variable voltage, you can control the voltage up or down, and that's how you control the speed of your locomotive. Okay, the fixed voltage is great for today's train because you're not using the transformer to control it, you're using the handheld remote. Whether that's a Lion Chief remote that comes with your starter set, or the Bluetooth app on your cell phone, or a legacy Cab 2 handheld. It's all the same idea. You have a fixed constant voltage on the track, and you control the train through manipulation of a chip inside the locomotive, a receiver inside that locomotive, whether it's a Bluetooth receiver or a legacy command module or a DCC decoder. It takes the signals that you're sending from your remote control to the locomotive and interprets that to control speed, direction, and all your sounds and so forth. Without that, if you're going with what we call conventional, you'll hear me use that term a lot, conventional, is when you vary the speed of the train by controlling the amount of voltage you apply to the track. So the more voltage you apply, the faster the train will go. So the first difference you'll have if you're running a Lion Chief engine or a legacy engine versus a conventional engine is you want fixed voltage on the track. That means if you have an engine that doesn't have a receiver in it, whether it's Bluetooth or anything else, it's going to take off at full speed because that's what it's going to see. It's going to see full power and away it goes. But if you have any engine with any sort of receiver in there, it'll see that voltage and just sit there and wait for its command. Garrett's asking, what about MTH train? MTH, DCS, same idea. Fixed voltage. Now they do their wiring a little bit different. We may talk about that in a little bit here, but it's the same idea as legacy. Conventional runs the same way on AC variable, or you can run them on DCS, which is their equivalent of legacy or TMCC control. So this is the way we've done things for years. We moved over to fixed DC. You can still expand your layout and use a power supply like this. And you can also grow from this and use it and move it over to AC. So all of our Lion Chief engines are designed to run on DC or AC power. That's really important to note. Your older conventional Lionel engines will not like DC at all. In fact, if you put them on there and they have a horn or a whistle or a bell, depending which way the polarity is set, you'll hear the horn blowing or the bell ringing. But they won't really like running on DC. However, a Lion Chief engine will run just fine on DC. It'll also run on AC. Okay, it's designed to handle either one. So you can take a Lion Chief locomotive and run it on your DC power supply, or if you go to another layout where you upgrade to larger power supplies and other larger trains and you go with an AC power supply, you won't have any issues. The only thing you may notice is that our Lion Chief engines will run a little bit faster. You'll have a little bit higher top end on AC because 18 volts AC is going to give you actually a little bit more current than 18 volts DC. There's a little bit of a difference in there. So you may see slightly faster trains running in AC mode. With that, let's talk quickly about volts, amps, and watts. Right. Volts is, we talk voltage is, as we've mentioned, this is what's controlling the speed of your train. All of our transformers operate in a typical voltage range. If it's a variable speed, obviously we're looking at 0 to about 18, 19 volts. Our fixed voltage is typically an 18 volt transformer. Okay, and that's a constant. You want to make sure you don't exceed about 19 volts on your railroad. That can be harmful to some of the electronics. They're not designed for a high voltage situation. Amperage, on the other hand, is a different part of this equation. And an amperage is how much power your train is drawing or how much power your power supply is putting out. So a good way to think of this is the more amps you have, the more stuff you can run. No matter how big your layout is, that voltage level is still going to stay at, let's say, around 18 volts. But as you add more and more things to your railroad, you're going to need more and more amperage to power them. This would include adding second train, second track. It would include adding more lights, sound accessories. Anything that's going to draw current is drawing amperage. And when you take the voltage and the amperage together, multiply those two, you get wattage. And that's how we rate our power supplies. So this is an 80 watt transformer, and we're going to look at a 180 watt transformer here in a little bit. And obviously you get a lot more power, 10 times the power out of that 180 watt transformer, to give you all a sense of that. So people start to ask, well, I got my oval track around the Christmas tree. I'm running my Lion Chief train. Everything's fun. I want to make it bigger. And one of the first things people will do is they'll go out and they'll buy more track. And that's the natural thing. And you think, well, as my oval gets bigger, do I need to add a bigger power supply? And the answer to that is really no. You don't have to immediately start with a new power supply just because you added more track to your layout. The amount of current that is being drawn is dependent on what you have on there. So you're still drawing, if it's still only the one track and you make only one train and you make your track twice as large, you're still only drawing the current from that one motor, that one headlight, the one sound speaker. So you don't really need to necessarily go to a larger power supply. What you might do is you might see what we call voltage drop. You might see where from the piece of track where your power supply is attached, okay, at the start of your railroad, you have your power track hooked up here, and you have your power supply plugged in here, and you've got full power here. Well, by the time you get to the other side of your railroad, way over there, this piece of track doesn't seem to have as much power. The train slows down, or maybe it stalls a little bit as it gets further and further away. And that's because at each one of these little joints, you're going to lose just a little bit of voltage. And cumulatively, that can add up. You can solve that problem by adding a bus wire and jumper wires, and connecting all that back to your main transformer. Your power supply is the same. The amount of power you're putting out is the same. We just need to improve the distribution of that power to the railroad. Think of it in terms of the high tension lines you see carrying power that then break down into smaller power lines and power grids to work their way out to your house. Same idea with your model railroad. You can also use those grids to do a number of things like isolating certain track sections so that you can turn trains on and off. And if you're doing conventional only, it gives you a way to run multiple trains at the same time on the same layout without necessarily needing legacy or Bluetooth or any of those systems. So something else to sort of keep in mind as you look at this. And we can get into block control like that later. They'll probably get too deep into there tonight. We'll be talking until midnight if we start getting into all of that. But I will address some of those things a little bit. I'm going to take you over here to the underside of a module we started working on a good bit ago and just show you the idea of a bus wire. So while I have the small camera minimized here, hopefully it doesn't make you all too dizzy as I move this. 1 minute. Okay, so we're looking here at the underside of a module, and you can see a number of red and green and yellow, black and stuff, and such wires running back and forth here underneath the road bed. These are our bus wires, and one of the first things that you'll notice is that, as I said, they're different colors, and there's a good reason for that. Each one of these tracks is on a different power circuit. And well, it's fairly easy on a small section like this to determine which track is which. After a while or after a few years, and you start to forget which wires go to where, it's helpful to have a color guide underneath there to help remind you and prevent you from connecting something to the wrong power supply. So the more colors you can use, the better. This is very easy to do if you have bench work and a permanent platform, because you can run all of this stuff underneath the track and never see it. If you're building a rug road around your floor, you can still do it. You're just going to want to hide the wires creatively in how you do things. Legacy and Lionel electronics are very forgiving on your bus wire. You can pretty much run it anywhere, any way you want. This is one area where DCS and MTH systems a little bit different than Lionel and Legacy because of the rail that they use to supply their signal. You have to be a little more particular about how you route that so that the signal gets to all the track at the same time. Again, more than we need to get into tonight, but just one thing to keep in mind about having the two systems on your layout, because both will play well together on the same track at the same time. You just have to make sure you wire them for whichever system is most picky. And in this case, that would be MTH wiring. But the Lionel system doesn't really care which way you take your wires, how you get the power there. It just wants the power there for the most part. Okay. These wires that you see here are number 14 gauge stranded wire. And that's usually what I recommend for most layouts for a power distribution wire. It's heavy enough that it will give you very little voltage drop, if any, on an average size layout. If you've got a bowling alley to fill, you might want to think about going to number 10 or number 12 wire for really long distance runs. But for the vast majority of us, we don't have to go that far. Number 14 wire will be just fine for you. For your bus, I recommend stranded wire instead of solid wire. It's a little more flexible. It's easier to run. And it just makes life a little easier underneath the layout. This is also a size of wire that is available at most hardware and home stores in various size rolls. So it's easy to get, multiple colors. You don't have to go looking very hard to find it. Like everything else, it's getting more and more pricey over the years, but it's still an easy go-to for your wiring. To connect the bus wire to the track itself, we're going to use feeder wires. And you can see a couple of those. You see a little black wire hanging down in the frame there. Those will be connected to the bus wire to carry that power that last little bit. And because that wire is very short, it doesn't have to be a very heavy gauge of wire. And if you have some of our older transformer sets, you'll see something like that here. Let me swing back over to the workbench. Okay, so this is a typical hookup wire from one of our transformer sets. Again, if you didn't have the plug-in for the DC power supply, you're very used to these already. And they come with a pair of spade terminals at one end that would connect into the red and black terminal on the back of your power supply. Okay. And then the other end connects into the track here with another pair of spade terminals on these crimp terminals here on the track. This is a part that is available, although not right at the moment. We're temporarily out of stock in service, but we do keep these in from time to time. If you come back, if you're looking for something like this that's already pre-wired, then the part that you want, I'm going to put it up here on the screen, is 610-2016-200. This is our terminal wire, and it comes just the way you see it here, with spade terminals on one end and the crimp connections at the other. This allows you to connect right into the fast track and then right into a transformer. If you're going to a bus line, you don't need this terminal at the other end. You snip that off, strip the end of the wire, and go ahead and put that to your bus line. But this is a nice, easy way to do this. By the way, these terminals are the same size that we use on all of our scales of track. So O-gauge fast track, American Flyer fast track, and our HO Magnalock track all have spade terminals on the bottom that are designed to accommodate this clip. You can make these yourself if you don't want to buy them through us. This is about a number 22 gauge wire, I believe. You can buy these same size spade terminals at the hardware store by the dozen or by the 100. Strip the end of the wire, crimp it on here, and you're good to go. So if you don't like soldering, there's a very solder-free, mess-free way of making these wires. There's nothing super scientific about it. Okay. If you don't want to go the terminal route like this, you can also solder directly to the rails on the bottom of your fast track. If you're not using fast track, if you're using another brand of track, you'll find something very similar, either another type of connection like this underneath, or in some cases, it's easy just to go right to the side of the rail, especially in the smaller scales. It's easiest just to go right to the side or the underside of the rail. On fast track, if you look on the bottom, you'll see a whole bunch of these little folded over terminals. For centuries with AC power, Lionel, the middle rail is AC hot. The outer two rails are AC ground. Okay. If you flip it over, it doesn't take too long to figure out which terminals are which. You see the center spades are for your center rail, and then you see the outer connections here for the outer rail. And for as long as I can remember, we've made red our standard for the AC hot rail in the center, and black our standard for the AC ground on the outside. So if you're sticking with that color code, you'd solder a red wire here, black wire here to one or the other side. You don't need to do both. This bus bar in here is what completes the circuit from one outer rail to the other. We can talk a little bit more about that and some fun things you can do with that in another episode on isolating track and isolating circuits and so forth. But that's a neat little thing to have handy. All right. So yes, you can solder right to the bottom here. In the previous episode where we were talking about this, I also mentioned that you can connect fast track underneath. Then there's a small section here. If you clip the tracks together, you can run a jumper from inside rail to inside rail, outside rail to outside rail, and go underneath the track here. Just a small, hard jumper cable. And very easy to put in there and do that. That will sort of take the place of a big long bus wire. So if you're building just a larger loop on the floor and you don't want wires running everywhere, you can do that, and it helps eliminate a lot of that voltage drop from the track up top. Of course, it does make it a little more challenging to take the track apart, but again, hit it with some more with soldering gun again, break that seal, and you can still undo it. All right. This little piece that I have here attached, you see it has a jumper underneath. We'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about blocks some more and isolating your track circuits. Okay. You cannot connect extra power to this very easily, but as I said, you do have the ability to run those wires from track to track if you need to expand it that way, or switch over to an AC power supply as your railroad grows. When you want to jump up to a larger power supply, that depends on how much you want to put on the train. As you get more trains, more accessories, more of a power load on the system, that's when you're going to want to increase your power supply. You're going to want to increase the wattage or the amperage part of the equation here to get more power. And we have a number of options for you with Lionel to do that. As I said, we start off with the 80 watt CW80. The next power option up from there is the GW180. And the GW180 is actually in two pieces. And let me put some item numbers up here for you all so you can have some part numbers. First is the CW80. We have a new version of that we'll be delivering this year, an upgraded version. The product number is 1908080. We put a lot of 80s in there in that part number to make it easy to remember for guys like me who have a hard time remembering the 2000 product numbers. We got to remember all the time. 1908080 is the new CW80s. These will be coming out soon. A much improved, much quieter, much more friendly version of the CW80. And this will work. This plugs into everyone's walls just the same way as the others. If you had a transformer before, you'll be good to go with this. It's an easy swap out for your layout. The GW180 uses the same housing for the control, but the power isn't inside here. If you pick these two up, this one weighs a good bit, this one very light. The power for the GW180 comes from what we call a brick. So the GW180 comes with both of these. Let me put that one up. Okay, two part numbers here. If you're going to do variable speed AC control, conventional control, then you want the GW180 power pack. That includes the power block here and your controller to vary the speed. And that's part number 637947. If you're sticking into the world of just command control, whatever type of command control that is, whether it's Bluetooth, whether it's legacy, DCS, doesn't matter. Then you don't really need this part of it. All you need is the power supply. And that part is available separately as well. That's our Powerhouse 180. And that number is there on the screen also, 685226. So for legacy users, for people building a much larger layout using Bluetooth and Lion Chief or Lion Chief Plus, this is the piece that you want. Okay, the GW180 includes both the Powerhouse 180 and a controller that you can use to vary the voltage on the track. The GW180, by the way, if you look at the back of this, again, very much like the CW80, here's your plug-in from the brick. And then here we have both a variable voltage output for the track, as well as a fixed voltage output for accessories. And just like this CW80, you can set this at whatever voltage you would like. So typically we recommend about 14 volts AC fixed for most of our accessories, everything from lamp posts to gatemen and so forth. It's a nice happy medium that won't burn out your light bulbs or your circuits, but also doesn't make anything too dim. All right, and you can set that with this controller so that it stays fixed at that all the time. So you have a fixed output and you have a variable output on the back of these, and that's true on the CW80 and the GW180. The GW180, the Powerhouse 180, honestly is as much power as most people probably need for a typical home layout. Maybe two of these, but probably that is really where a lot of people have all the power that they need. For those who want something larger or more sophisticated, we do offer the ZWL transformer. That's roughly the equivalent of 4 of these output to your layout, all with independent control. But if you, again, are just using fixed voltage, you can daisy chain these. You don't, and you can also use these to control different power districts, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So as you isolate one power area from another, you can build up your layout that way, and there are a variety of reasons to do that. We'll get into that in just a minute. But this is really your standard building block. Very easy to get, commonly available now. See your friendly local Lionel dealer, and they will hook you up. Go back to our other screen here. Chuck asks, what is the recommended way to connect the Molex connector on the brick to the track itself? So what he's talking about here is the connector that comes off of the brick. This guy connecting that to the track. We do make a jumper cable that goes from here and has an output. I don't typically recommend that you take a pair of clippers to this and just nip it, but I suppose if you wanted to, you could. But again, typically, especially if you're not sure what you're doing, cutting large wires with sharp objects is not something I like to recommend. We do make a connection that will work from the GW80, and actually the straight bricks. Some of the older ones did just have a pair of exposed wires here, so you don't have to worry about that. This plug is designed to also go straight into your power cord. Good question. All right, so where was I going? Power supplies. This power supply will probably operate 2 to 3 trains without any problem. It's good. This is where it gets kind of dicey when people say, well, how much power do I need? Because there are a lot of different ways to look at that. Different trains have different power draws. And as soon as we start to say, oh, well, you can run 2 or 3 trains with this power supply without any problem, that'll be the time when the guy wants to run 2 or 3 of his 1930s trains that draw a super amount of current, or multiple Pullman motor-equipped locomotives and 30 illuminated passenger cars, all with incandescent bulbs, right? Those are going to have a much, much heavier current draw than a Lion Chief Plus train set. The 54-watt power supply that we put in our train sets is typically, if you have 2 of our Lion Chief starter sets, you can put them on the same track with that one train, with that one power supply, and it has enough power for both of them. The 72-watt, easily two Lion Chief starter sets, maybe even a third without any issues. Now, at that point, you're probably adding more track too, because you've got a lot of trains running around a 40 by 60 oval, but you have enough power there to do that. As you start adding accessories, as you start adding lighted passenger cars, as you start adding bigger locomotives with more smoke units, especially, these things draw more current. And so the number of those that you can run on a given power supply is less than a more simple locomotive. Okay. As you upgrade your power supplies, don't get rid of the old ones. If you upgrade to a GW180 for your track power and your main power supply, keep that 80-watt CW80, or even the smaller power supplies. Hook up your accessories to those. Hook up the streetlights in your town. Hook up the different buildings and things like that. Because what you're doing now is you're taking that power load off of this and putting them on a separate power supply. It gives you more power for your trains and better control of your trains, while making use of materials you already have, providing a simple fixed voltage to those accessories, so they have all the power they need when you need it. And since they're now on separate circuits, if you have a problem with an accessory, it doesn't affect the operation of your trains and vice versa. So going back to the idea of color coding your wires again, the more you can keep things separate and organized, the better you'll be down the road. As you have problems in one area, it doesn't shut down the entire layout. Josh has a good question here. What happens if the CW80 is connected to the track but shut off, and a Lion Chief power supply is plugged into the layout? You should be fine. You shouldn't get any back feed in. But what I would recommend, honestly, because you are mixing AC and DC, you're probably better off once you put the AC power supply, whether it's a CW80 or anything. I would take the DC power off of there. You're just going to make life a lot easier for yourself. So it's not something that I would recommend having the two of those on at the same time all the time. Okay. All right. So we talked about expansion, and I talked a little bit about putting things in power districts. So just like taking the accessories off of your main power supply and putting them on a different circuit, you can do the same thing with your track. Maybe you're building a layout with two independent loops, but you want to connect them with a crossover so that you can run a train from one loop to the other. This is a very common, typical type of setup. And what a lot of people will do so that they have independent control or at least consistent power to both loops is they'll put a power supply on each one of those loops independently to make sure that those two don't give you issues crossing back and forth. You want to isolate the track where they connect. And since we're talking about this type of block control, you want to isolate the center rail. All right, let me swing back over here so you can see this part better. Right. This is our 1 3/8 inch piece of fast track. A part number here for that written out in advance. Someone's asking if there's a part number for the Molex cable. I don't have it off the top of my head. I have to go into the website and look. That's one I'll have to come back to on that one for you. Let's talk about this fast track for a second. Okay. This is a handy little piece of track because it already has a cut rail in the middle. And as I showed earlier, we have a jumper underneath. With that jumper in there, this is just a 1 3/8 piece of track like any other piece of track. But if I take that jumper out, then this insulation gap here means that whatever's on this side of the gap will run off of one power supply, and on this side operates off of the other. This assumes that you have a common ground, a common outside rail. You don't have to isolate this. But when you do that, you want to make sure that both transformers are in phase. Okay, and that's easy to do. We can cover that in another topic, or maybe I can even get Dave to cover that in a Demos with Dave session on a Monday. But as long as both transformers are in phase, basically what that means is they're both supplying the current AC to the center rail and ground to the outer rail so that they're in sync with one another and you don't have a polarity flip. If you were in DC wiring, same idea would be negative and positive, right? That your negative is negative on both power supplies and your positive is positive on both. You can do it that way. Your train running from one to the other, as long as the voltage is constant and the same on both, the train will not notice any difference, even if it's a variable speed conventional operating train. You can go seamlessly from one loop to the other loop as long as the voltages are the same. If it's any type of command controlled train, of course you'll be just fine. So as long as the power is there, the train will have no trouble going from one track to the other. So you can use sections like this to isolate multiple loops on your layout. You can use a section like this also if you have a yard and a lot of trains stored in that yard. You can hook each of those tracks up to a toggle switch, or we also have command circuits to do this if you want to do this through power up and power down through your legacy controller. But a simple way is just to put each one of those track sections on a toggle switch, and you can turn that block off if you're not using it. That reduces your power load on the transformer. Also, if you've got a large layout and you've got a dozen locomotives with sound and smoke, and they're sitting there, in idle sounds and simmering away with smoke all the time, that can get kind of annoying. So if you want to quiet things down, you can shut off those tracks, and then when you're ready to run a train, just toggle it up and away you go. If you don't want to use these small sections of fast track because it doesn't fit well in your track geometry, or you're using another brand of track, you can get the same results by taking a Dremel tool, a motor tool with a cutoff wheel, and just putting a cut down through the rail in the center, and you'll be all set to go. That's all you have to do is cut that. If you're using the older tubular track, you can cut that the same way, or there were also insulated pins that went in on the end and would insulate that track circuit. So another easy way if you're using the older tubular track. But most people in most scales, again, quick swipe with a Dremel tool, cut the rail, and you're good to go. And you can build your layout into multiple power districts very easily. If you've got a very, very large layout, you may want to have multiple power districts on the same loop of track. For a lot of clubs and things like that, they'll do that. In addition to being a way to build more power and balance your power, this is also a good way. Hang on, let the light come back and balance here. Also a good way to help isolate problems. So if you have one power circuit on this transformer and another power circuit on another transformer, each with their own circuit breaker, if you have a short here, that section of the track will shut down, the other section will stay live. Not only does that keep some of your trains running, but it also makes it that much faster to find the problem when you have a short. Because if you have a short and your whole railroad goes out, you have to check everything. The more isolated you have sections, the easier it will be to find the source of the problem. That being said, you can take anything to too much of an extreme. You don't want every 3 feet of track on its own power district. But grouping things down into smaller and smaller sections, always a smart way to go to help do that. Barry asks another good question here. Do we have a separate wire with a plug-in barrel jack on one end and bare wire or spades on the other? We don't at this time, but not a bad idea. Typically, the barrel jack is what we plug into the track. So that would be sort of going from track to another track supply. All of the spade terminals that we make, though, as I mentioned earlier, you can get these at a hardware center. You can go on Amazon once you have the right size and buy them there if you want to buy them in bulk. These are things that you can make pretty easily on your own. And another Workbench Wednesday, because we're running at about 45 minutes already tonight, we can sit and talk about some basic soldering techniques as well. Soldering is one of those things that can scare a lot of people. In fact, Mark is asking a good question here. How do you connect the feeder wire to the bus wire? Typically, this is a case where I will wrap the feeder around the bus and solder it. You can also, though, if that worries you, they have what are called suitcase connectors, which will take one gauge of wire in and attach it to the other by just simply pressing down. I don't like those as much. I like to make sure everything's nice and tight and soldered, but it's another solderless way of doing things if you don't want to make that connection. But soldering, just like everything else in model railroading, the first time you do it, it's going to scare you. And then after you've done it a couple of times, you realize it's a great tool and a great asset. All right. Another good question here coming up from YouTube. Can you phase 3 different transformers together so they have a common ground and run your accessories separate from track power? Yes, you can do that. You can do all that as long as you can phase as many transformers together as you'd like. 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, whatever you want to phase together with a common ground, and then have one transformer supplying accessories, one transformer supplying your outer loop, another one for your inner loop. Maybe one is just your operating sawmill accessory, your sawmill area with all of that going on. And then you have a city scene over on the other side of the layout, and that's got its own transformer. And you use that common ground in a lot of ways to make the most out of your railroading. We didn't really talk about it tonight, but you can also gap the outside rail for a different type of insulation, insulated block section, and use that to activate accessories. And if they're in phase, then that works very well. So by isolating the outside rail, again, coming back to the fast track here, we talked about this bus bar. This bus bar is what connects the two outer rails of your track so that they're both AC ground. If we wanted to have let's use a typical one, a railroad crossing light. Okay, we have a railroad crossing track, and as the train approaches that railroad crossing, we want the lights to come on, and after the train is passed, we want the lights to go off. Last Monday, Dave showed on Demos with Dave the 153 IR controller that does that by using an infrared light beam bouncing off of your train, so that you don't need to have any connection with your track at all in that situation. That's a great way to do it, especially if your railroad's already built and you don't want to have to go underneath and cut rails and do that. But you can also activate that accessory very easily by using the connection of the outside rail. And to do that, you'll make a cut in the outside, one of the outside rails, either one, where you want that signal to come on. And then at the other end of that block, make another cut in the same rail where you want the signal to turn off after the train leaves. And then anywhere in between those two gaps, you want to make sure that this bus bar is not present, so that those rails are isolated. Your train will still run because it's going to get its AC hot and ground from the other two rails. And as the solid axles, the solid metal wheels of your train pass into that section, they complete the circuit from outer rail to outer rail, and the wheels of your train replace that bus bar. So that while the train's in the block, your other wire to your accessory that controls it and turns that accessory then on and off, obviously, is also connected to that same rail. So as your wheels cross in, they complete the circuit, and the power goes out to that accessory. There's no power to that section of track, that section of rail coming from the transformer itself. It's fed only through the train. That's a great thing that 3-rail track has that the 2-rail systems can't really do quite as easily, because you need both rails with power all the time. So it's one very big advantage for 3-rail trains. And by having your transformers in phase, you can have the hot wire from your accessory going to a different transformer than the transformer that's powering your track, which is where we started off with all of that question and explanation. That's the type of thing that we can show in another video, and really to show it properly and make it probably a little more clear, have set up and actually do on a demonstration table for you, so you can see how those circuits work. But it's an easy one to do, and you can do that with any piece of fast track. We do sell an activation track that already has those gap rails and the bus bars removed. But if you're building a large layout, or maybe you want that track to go around a curve and don't want to buy the straight extenders for that, you can simply flip the track over, take that bus bar out, and make any section of track an extension track for that piece. So a real easy way to add accessories to your layout. But yes, the key is definitely keeping your transformers in phase. All right. Another question: does any of the wiring require soldering, or do they have connectors? As I've talked about here, everything that we supply you so that you never have to pick up a soldering iron. That being said, if you're comfortable with soldering, it's a great way to work around some of this, cut your cost down a little bit, because you're not always buying connectors to put on everything. And you can put the wires and the pieces exactly where you want them. Very, very easy to work with. Okay, so great question. Tim's Trains asks, why were the Powerhouse 180 switched from a 2-wire Molex to a 3-wire Molex plug? I should remember that, but I can't off the top of my head, and I believe it has something to do with the grounding wire. It's probably a better question for Dave on demos with Dave. But a few years ago, we did take a look at the GW180 and made a number of improvements in that, just as we've been doing with the CW80 and the Powerhouse 180. We made some changes and improvements there to bring things up to the new standards that the UL has for power supplies. That may have been part of it as well. But then also for just again, continuous improvement in our product. We're always looking for new ways to do that. Another question here: can this transformer be phased with older transformers? Yes. Your older transformers, as long as they're AC transformers, are putting out the same relative range of voltage, and you'll be okay as long as they are, again, in phase. Now, there is some difference in the AC sine wave between an older transformer and a newer transformer. Didn't want to get into that much into the weeds tonight with that, but yes, you can still phase them together so that your grounds are common. And in that case, you probably want to have, again, the older transformer maybe is now on your accessories, or one loop of track where you specifically like to run your older trains with the older transformer, and then another transformer on a newer transformer on another line for use with your more modern locomotives that like the different sine waves. Okay. Barry asks also, can we buy just a barrel jack wire? I don't think we have just a barrel jack wire available. We do sell replacement power supplies if you need that. But again, the other end of the barrel jack is usually going into that DC brick. It's going into this part of it here, which if you're breaking this open to get in here, we probably don't want to do that. So the barrel jack end of it is actually pretty easy. If you do have one of these and you decide, you know what, I just want to go, I can solder this on, I want to get rid of the barrel jack end, that you can trim off, strip the end of this wire, and away you go. You're just back to a normal connection. Or you can put the spade connections on here and connect the two rails. You just want to make sure you got the polarities right, since these are conveniently color-coded both as black wires for you. All right. And Garrett, you've been asking all night. So I will, now we've talked a good bit about power supplies and transformers. Do I like steam or diesel? Do we like Amtrak? Me personally, if it's a train, I love it. I haven't really found too many trains yet that I'm not partial to. As you can see from my library here behind me, if it's on wheels and rails, it interests me somewhere. So it's great, and appreciate your passion and sticking with us all night and asking the questions. So thank you for being with us. All right, let's see if we have some other questions here. Iron Fox 7. One question: can you get a plug for the Cab 2 remotes separately? Not sure which plug you're thinking of there. If you're talking about the plug for the station that the plugs into the for the either the 990 or the 993, we do have those available through customer service. Go to lionel.com, go to the service button up in the upper corner, and then type in your product number, or just put in base 2 Cab 2 remote, and you'll get the product number, and then you'll get a complete parts breakdown, and you can order all the parts right there off of our website. So real easy way to do that. Another good question here: is there a plastic insulating pin for fast track like there is for tubular track? In order to make your own insulating track sections, it would make it easier to connect tracks and keep the tracks level. Good question. We don't really have a plastic pin that we insert for the fast track. We use either the cut rail piece here, that 1 3/8 inch section, works very well for that. So you don't have pins to take in and remove. One of the things we wanted to do with fast track was get rid of those pins that were easy to pop out. Having built a few layouts with tubular track, that is a giant pain. Inevitably, you end up with two pins in one side and one pin in the other, but it's not in the right place, and you've got to switch things all around. So the fast track pins, while you can actually take the track apart without too much difficulty if you know where you're pinching, and take a pin out, they're really not designed for that. They're designed to stay together, so you don't have to fool with that. Easiest way to get the gaps where you want them in fast track is to actually just go ahead and cut the rail, and that will get you the same results. Okay, and Dale asked a good question, and I think I'm going to end with this one tonight because it lets me end on a very happy note. And we've had a lot of great questions tonight. I'm happy to see that we were able to get this out on both Facebook and YouTube. This is the first time we've been on both channels, and looks like we're hitting a much broader audience. So I'm very happy to see that. We'll continue with this format going forward. Dale asks, how is the response to the 21 catalog based on order submissions? I placed my order, and I'm so excited for those items to arrive later this year. Thank you, Dale, and thank you to everybody out there who ordered something from the latest catalog. We've been tallying up orders over last week. We've got a few more things to add up. Next week, we'll be gathering all the final numbers and sending things over to factories so that we can get schedules completed and let you all know when these things are coming. Obviously, I can't talk all of the details of finances and things here on this program or publicly, but I will say we had a great year and a great catalog, and we are very happy with how things came in. So it looks like a lot of you folks found something very, very unique or very useful in there for you. And we're very happy to see that. The other thing that really encouraged us this year is our track sales are way up. And I've heard this from a lot of other people in the industry as well. A lot of model train companies have done very well, especially with their track sales. And again, as I started off with the program saying, I think a lot of people were at home last year and finally got started on their layouts and finally got expanding things. And that's why we really felt tonight was a good night to talk about this. It's been a great chance for a lot of people, despite everything that's been horrible about 2020. And I don't want to make light in any way of the situation that we've all had to go through. But for many, this was an opportunity to finally start the model railroad that they've been dreaming of for a long time. And if there's any sort of silver lining in things, for a lot of people, that was it. And for us, that's nice from a sales perspective, but really, as a person who's a modeler myself and a train guy myself, it's very happy for me to see people who have been buying trains for years finally having an opportunity to start enjoying them, because that's what this hobby is all about. And that's what this program was set up to be all about, was to talk about how we can build better models and be better modelers and get the most enjoyment out of the trains and share some good times together. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. This program runs every other week on Wednesdays at 7. So we'll be back here in 2 weeks. I have no idea what we're going to be building then. It all depends on what I have room for on my workbench at the time. But until we meet again, I want to say thank you to everyone again. Wish you well, safe travels, and happy railroading. Thank you, everybody.